promise. Everybody do me a favor and welcome on Pastor JJ. How you doing, brother?
Man, I am good. I'm excited to be here. Just in the midst of all this going on, man. I'm just thrilled and honored to have this opportunity to be with you and to see you face to face and have this conversation tonight.
We've interacted for what, going on almost about a year now over Facebook, just kind of talking and you have posted some very good questions on your Facebook. You have no fear whatsoever of jumping in on the deep end and having some good conversations. So I'm looking forward to tonight and hopefully what can come out of it.
Yeah.
So
It's an honor.
I was actually at lunch with a guy today and talking with him. The subject he had asked me what we were going to be talking about tonight, and I told him, I said, usually I like to kind of let the Holy Spirit just lead us as far as the conversation and where it's going to go. I said, but in all honesty, I said, I really think tonight we're gonna do quite a bit of discussion on racism within the church and racism just in general. And he kind of looked at me from across the table and he was like, is it really still that big of a deal? And and in his defense, he lives in an area in which, in all honesty, there isn't much of a racial mix. He lives in an area, I believe, that's about 95, 96% Caucasian. So it's not something that he interacts with much anymore.
Mhm.
And as we began to talk, I shared with him, I said, I wasn't aware of it for many years, as far as just how I knew it was an issue, but I didn't know it was as big of an issue. And he asked me the question. He said, "Well, what do you think we can do to fix it?" And I told him, I said, in all honesty, I said, I think the biggest thing we can do to begin fixing it is just to sit down and talk.
Mm.
So walk me through your thoughts on this, because I know you got a little shocked whenever I said that he asked the question, is it really that big of an issue?
Yeah. I think even right there, being willing to ask that question, but then also sit with what could have been some discomfort, because over time, for me, as I am as a black man who loves Jesus with all of his heart, um, and seeing my other brothers and sisters, I like to call them vanilla, my vanilla brothers and sisters, have had the ability to escape or leave conversations when it is too taxing or when it is too uncomfortable. But as an African American man, I don't have that privilege or that advantage to escape a conversation because I live this. I'll be 43 May 29th of this year, and as long as I can remember, I haven't been able to escape this reality of who I am in America. So for him to be able to ask that question, but then to engage with that, for me, that is a sign of I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to understand, I'm willing to grow, and I'm willing to be a part of the solution.
Right. Well, let me ask you, before we dive too deep, before we go
Mhm.
too deep into this, do me a favor, just kind of introduce yourself to my people who are watching. Let us know, like, where you're from, a little bit of your background, what you do, that kind of a thing.
Bet. So as you see, my name is Jefferson Jones. Some know me as Pastor JJ. I I'm originally from Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and that has become, God is very strategic in everything that He does. My father was in the military and was stationed there out of Corpus Christi, Texas. And so I was born there in '80, lived there for almost 8 years. Took a cross country trip to Southeast Virginia and grew up there. The rest of my childhood. Then leaving there from high school, did undergrad at Virginia Union, got a degree in biology, moved to Southwest Virginia, near Virginia Tech, up in the mountains, lived there for about 20 years. And just recently, last year, moved to Georgia, Duluth, which is 35 minutes outside of Atlanta. I tell that because it's important to my story. As I believe the Lord has conditioned me to have a very open mindset to people, understanding different cultures, being able to be a multicultural man, multi-ethnic, and knowing how to navigate in and out of different cultures and almost be like a chameleon. And so I am the lead. I'm the founder of Surge Ministries, which is a ministry designed to disciple people who transform culture. And in that, under that umbrella, we also have Race and Grace, which is the ministry designed to eradicate racism in the church. People are like, that gets some pauses. Like, why are you freezing up on me? Is there a glitch? So I'm a pastor, also connected under Apostle Ryan, my spiritual covering, my apostle, my pastor, spiritual father, at ATL Global Hub here in Atlanta. Um, and so I've been in ministry over 20 years. So that's just a little bit. Married for 21 years. I got two sons. My wife is Rosa. My boys, Peter, is 13, and Abraham, who's 11. So that's just a little bit. I also do life coaching. I'm a chaplain. I also do educational consulting, and I go travel to middle schools, K through 12 schools, to teach on any topics relating to those demographics. And then being able to pinpoint the specific needs that they have. And then, of course, also, a man of God, a preacher who loves the Lord. And so, I'm here to really help build bridges. I'm a bridge builder. I want to build bridges in the body of Christ across ethnic and cultural differences. And so I'm a man that wears many hats for the kingdom.
Fantastic. Sounds like you stay pretty busy.
Yes.
It's interesting because so far, everyone that I've interviewed and had conversation with on this have been individuals who have been pursuing God, and have been pursuing kingdom growth, not just within the church, but has been pursuing it in multiple different aspects, in business, in finance, in all of these different areas, taking the kingdom from inside of those four walls and pushing it out and letting the world see. And I love seeing that kind of a thing take place. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for being willing to sit down and have a conversation about some of this stuff. So now let me ask you, because being from originally from Anchorage, Alaska, how old were you whenever you left Alaska?
I was I was 9 days shy of 8 years old. We
Okay,
left in the month of May. So I was almost eight.
so from Alaska, you said to West Virginia,
No, Southeast Virginia.
Southeast
So you
Virginia.
heard of Emporia, Virginia? It's like
Yep,
an hour south of Richmond, Virginia.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, what that's a huge cultural difference. That's a huge cultural difference, and then to end up in Georgia of all places. Um, at Talk to me a little bit about the differences as far as, because again, um, this conversation is going to be a lot about race and a lot about racism and experiences.
Mhm.
Because in all honesty, the only place that we can speak from is our experience, what we've
Oh,
seen, what we've witnessed, and talk to me a little bit about the differences from Anchorage, Alaska, to Southeast Virginia to Georgia.
yeah, yeah. So, and then I got to wiggle in Southwest Virginia, which is a big
Ah,
key because we spent 20 years there. So, coming from Anchorage, Alaska, being as far as I can remember, I was the only black kid in any of my classes. And so, and grew up in the suburbs in a neighborhood where there was only one other black family. And so my connection to Black culture outside of my family and the family across the street was very limited. So much to where when we moved from Alaska to from suburbs to rural country, I mean country. I mean like picking corn and learning how to pick butter beans, learning how to pick watermelon, all those things. My grandfather was a farmer. He was a tobacco farmer and so many other things. It was a culture shock for me to where I moving to that area, Freeman, Virginia, in the country, I was picked on by other Black kids, and they were wondering, like, why do you talk like that? Why do you sound like that? Pretty much saying that I didn't sound like them. They said that I sounded like a white boy. So it was a cultural shock for me, and ended up moving and living around all of my family members to where I was able to now be immersed in a rich culture of Black people all around me, and it was new, it was unfamiliar to me, but at the same time, it felt good. Um, so having that experience and then moving, going to undergrad at Virginia Union, which was a historically Black college and university, still having that that rich African American Black experience, and then eventually going to Southwest part of Virginia at Virginia Tech, living there for 20 years and being again surrounded by what I started in, which was pretty much predominantly white culture. And so, but in that though, Bishop, I believe the Lord allowed me to have these opportunities to go in and out of different cultures to be able to know how to fit and blend into these different cultures. Now, my first encounter with really dealing with what we would call racism or dealing with racist ideals didn't happen until I moved to Southwest Virginia. Um, And so, but then even in that season, looking back to where I grew up in Brunswick County, which is where Freeman is, coming to learn that even though I went to a predominantly Black high school, there was another school maybe 2 miles away that was a private school, which was
Ah,
predominantly what?
white.
Right. And that's when I didn't learn until I moved away that that school was built for one reason, and it's under a term we call white flight. So this journey in my life has been, I say, one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened, because I believe that the Lord really allowed me to be shaped and developed and conditioned to be a man of God who knows how to lean into the life of others, learn how to be immersed into the cultures of different people, and not just me, but I will say for the most part that most African Americans, most Black people know how to. A lot of us know how to yield ourselves to accommodate or yield ourselves to lean into others. Is because it's what we've had to know how to do. Um, and so, yeah, I'll pause there because I want you to be able to reflect or just ask questions because I have some ideas of stories from living in Southwest Virginia that'll be key to our conversation tonight.
Cool. Well, I grew up here in South Carolina. I grew up in. I mean, come on, nobody does racism like the South does. We do it best.
Y'all do it
So
big. No.
we do it big, man. So, but I grew up in a family that was, I mean, we were Christ followers, loved Jesus, loved the whole kingdom aspect of this. And so for me, racism, I experienced racism from a completely different spectrum, so to speak. There were individuals that we knew of, that I knew of, who absolutely hated anybody. Um, they hated anybody who was not white. Um, but at the same time, my family was very intentional about, we didn't spend time with them. We didn't hang out with them. We didn't condone it. We didn't support it in any kind of a way. Um, and as I grew up, I guess you could say I had kind of grown up sheltered from the idea or from the fact that it was still as intense as it could be in some ways. And my first encounter of it personally was I walked into a grocery store. I was probably 13 years old. Walked into it wasn't a grocery store, it was a gas station. It was our local town gas station. And there was an individual standing there who he panhandled every morning out in front of the gas station. And I later grew up to know him, and I worked with him, and he and I actually we ended up becoming I wouldn't say friends, but close acquaintances, so to speak. We were on a first name basis kind of a deal. But he approached me and asked me for money that day. And I told him, I said, I don't have any money for you. I don't have anything. I've got enough to go in here and get what I came to get. And his response to me was, no, you owe me. And I said, well, what do you mean I owe you? Now this is a grown man talking to a 13-year-old boy. And I said, what do you mean I owe you? And he said, you're white. You have money. You owe me. And I said, I at 13, I'm blown away. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, what do you mean I owe you? So it was it shook me for a little while, and then
Right.
I just chalked it up to, well, that's just, I'm not going to say his name. That's just him. Like, that's the way he acts. And then as I got older, I have seen it from both sides, and I kind of walked away from it for a little bit and didn't see much of it anymore until my daughter Samantha came into my life. And when my daughter Samantha came into my life, and I began to notice some of the ways that she has been treated, some of the ways she's been talked to, some of the ways that she has been, some of the service that she has gotten, that whenever I turn around and they see me there, all of a sudden the attitude changes a little bit. Um, I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, what y'all about to make me y'all about to make all the country come out of me, because I grew up on a dairy farm, so I can roll with the best of them. But that's been kind of, and it's interesting as she has been a part of my life, and I've gotten to know her and watch her and see her, and then with Veritas, because we're an extremely mixed congregation, church family, and that's been intentional on our part, and it's had to be intentional because let's just say in the church you have white churches, you have black churches, you have Hispanic churches, and we don't mix
Come
very
on,
well.
sir.
So it's been intentional with us actually going and trying to grow the fact that we're one. But we part of that, understanding that we really truly we can only, unless we're intentional about it, we only understand what our experience has been. And I think that I personally I think that unless we're willing to stop and say, okay, tell me about your experiences. I can't hurt for you, and I can't I cannot suffer for you or with you if I don't listen to what it is that you've experienced and what you've gone through.
Yeah.
So walk me walk me through a little bit as far as um, from a black man's perspective who uh, who is a part of the church and who has been a part of the church. How long have you been part of the church?
Oh my gosh. How old? Let's see. I'm 42 now, so minus 9, so 33 years.
Okay. So I mean, you've seen it. It's. I would honestly be willing to say it's more predominant within the church than it is in the South now than it is. And I don't know about everywhere else because this is where I'm at. But I know in this area, I see it more predominantly within the South than
Lord,
in the
sir, you've been
church.
violence and chaos tonight, I see.
Yes, I am. I'm not scared of a tough conversation.
I'm not either. And I'll
So
do it with a smile.
look, I've been part of a church in which we were. we were busting in kids from all over the community, and they were not referred to as the church kids. They were referred to as those kids. And I look, it's taken everything in me to not fight people over that. So again, I can speak from what I've experienced, but
Yeah.
walk me through some of what you've seen.
Uh, all right. I'll start with this was a situation where I was a part of a ministry where the initial desire was to have a multi-ethnic, multicultural ministry. And this I had an opportunity to minister one Sunday on just it's when the racial issue started to uprise again, and issue with police started to rise up again. And this is before the big takeoff of Black Lives Matter. This is before it became a big issue. This was in the earlier stages of it, and I can't remember the year. But I preached a message, and the title of the message was Jesus and the Lives That Matter. Jesus and the Lives That Matter. I preached the message because the pastor um, wanted me to give my perspective. He wanted a black man's angle and experience. And I ended up sharing some of my personal stuff that I'd been through since living in Southwest Virginia. And after I preached the message, someone came to him, a couple people went to him about my message. Another friend came and communicated to him from another state who was a black man, asking why I was so angry.
Ah,
Right. And so, and what happens, Bishop, is in circles where there is an initiative or a desire to have a multi-ethnic church. It's on the surface and not embedded in the hearts of the people who are trying to build that type of ministry. It is like a veneer.
right,
And so in that experience, I realized that you weren't ready for me to be my authentic self at the table that you're trying to build. But you just want pieces of me that will make your image look like what you're speaking. And so that was
we want a
hard.
token.
You want you want a
We want a
token.
token. Yeah.
You want a token. And so, that was something that I had to navigate through. And I began to see this, people will say, well, that's not racism. That's not, I said, but the thing is that we had to understand that. And see, I can't go into the historical, but so much right now, but we got to understand from my perspective, um, from my understanding, from my lens, from what I've studied and what I've learned, that slavery and racism, they were baked into the Christianity that was in the foregrounds of America. And so if you, Bishop, if I said, Bishop, go make a cake for me and throw some flour in there and some oil in there and some vanilla in there and some lemon and some sugar and some brown sugar or whatever, all the ingredients, that when that cake comes out the oven, you cannot separate those ingredients out.
Right.
But for us in the body of Christ, in order for us to move forward, there has to be a time of sitting down at the table, and it has to be a culture of sitting down at the table and having these conversations that lead to sustainable transformation. But we gotta be able to sit at the table and look at what's been baked into the system. And in that, we have to understand that as you're doing now, that my experience has to be seen, has to be heard, and people have to not center themselves. See, in this moment, this is a teachable moment. Bishop, you're not centering yourself as a white man. As I'm speaking, as I'm sharing, you are listening. And that when I have the desire to listen, and when I'm truly invested in active listening and understanding, I cannot center myself. But what happens, we know that people want to center themselves. Um, so I gave one story. Let me know. I'm gonna pause and let you and just let you.
Yeah, I think one of, and this came up during my lunch today as well. Um, Apostle Mostella, calm yourself down. I love you too. Um, but this came up during lunch as well, in which I ended up telling the individual that the recognition of one reality or the recognition of one experience is not the denial of another one. And far too often, what we're wanting validation of our experience, and we're wanting validation of what we have been through and what we have seen and what we understand. And far too often, we want that at the expense of somebody else's, because we want to be seen. And it's in all honesty, it's a pride issue of us saying, I have to be seen, I have to be heard, I have to be felt. And it's on every side of the equation of not being willing to sit down and say, okay, let me hear your experience. Now let me share my experience. And then maybe we can find some way to meet in the middle, and let's address this issue. And so we have to remember that the validation of one experience is not, it is not the denial of another one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we just, for some reason, we can't seem to grasp. And
Yeah.
it frustrates me to no end.
Oh yeah. And I didn't tell you that when I preached that message called Jesus and the Lives That Matter. You know that one of the more senior members of that church twisted what I said, and
I believe it.
they said I preached. Oh, this was. They said, oh, this was so good. Jesus and all lives matter, and that's not what I never said that. And
Right.
so in that, what we have to do, see, and there's a historical tracking of, as we look at this thing over time. I'm not getting into the whole shebang, but it's a thing called cognitive dissonance. And over time, what has happened amongst white people in America, and even Thomas Jefferson, that when he had the scientists come along, because there's a scientific racism, that, you heard of Carolus Linnaeus and the nomenclature, scientific naming. He was the one that was responsible for, kingdom, and then you have genus and species and all those layers. What he did was he created a system along with some other scientists to place people in categories based on what they look like. And so
Right.
Thomas Jefferson posed a question to these scientists, and he didn't say what, he asked, what makes black people uh, inferior? Instead of saying what, he asked why. So he posed his question in a way with the mindset that they were already in a position
Right.
of inferiority. And so over time, there has been this trying to suppress the cognitive dissonance, because when cognitive dissonance come, if you have a thought in your mind and I come with a challenging thought, it causes emotions, it causes conflict internally. So to get rid of that conflict, they came up with ways to justify their belief system.
Right.
So, okay, I'll pause there.
Which we still do that today in the church.
Bingo.
We do it constantly. So, but where do you think that this is, where do you think that we understand that the root of the root of all issue, in all honesty, is sin. It's a misperception of the value of people
Yeah.
and what Christ really has done and what he did on the cross. And so the fact that um, there is no difference between us. There's no one individual of less value than the other. And there is that fear, I believe, that when we begin to have conversations like this, that there's an attempt to elevate one group above another, and that has limited the conversation a great deal. I'll be honest with you, because you had mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of it. I wasn't a fan of it at all, and I saw, and I don't know what your experience was with it. I know that here in our area, the experiences that we had with it, in which I had a conversation in which I was told, just straight out told, look, you white people have had your time. This is our time. You need to sit down, shut up. We're better than you are now.
Mm.
And I kind of walked away from the conversation like, this is not, hopefully this is not what they were trying to this is not what they were trying to reach for with the idea of Black Lives Matter. I pray it's not what they were trying to reach for, because all this is taking a scale that is this way and trying to fix the issues by tipping it in the other direction. And my personal opinion is that doesn't fix an issue. It just creates more issues. And so I wasn't as big of a fan with it as many of the. Now we I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, um, but we had a lot of white churches in this area who jumped on that bandwagon. They
Mm.
jumped, both feet jumped on it. Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and putting it on their signs, posting it on their Facebook, talking about it nonstop. And yet, when I stopped and I looked, I said, okay, but what, okay, I see you white churches saying this, but I don't see your people in the streets. I don't see you. I don't see you loving on them. I don't see you going out and meeting these people, um, and praying with them and asking if you can be a part of their lives and getting to know who they are and getting to know. I'm seeing. I was invited to do a. I was invited to go on and join a bunch of other pastors on a walk, and it was supposed to be a walk to show unity and to say that we were pastors against racism. And I was like, when I got invited to do it, I was like, I love y'all, but I'm not joining y'all on this. I'm not going to do it. We've had hundreds of walks,
Mm.
and all it is your 5 minutes of fame, and you're getting your picture put in the newspaper. And in my personal opinion, this is a marketing stunt in order for you to say, look at us and look at what we support, but show me by what you're doing. Do something more than just walk, please.
Show me your works.
So, walk me through a little bit your opinion, your thought process on, did the Black Lives Matter movement help us, or did it cause a greater division?
Mm. I would say that it is a combination of the two. Um, being that there's the phrase, then there's the organization. I'm a
Right.
huge fan of the phrase that my life matters, and then put a little TOO on the end. Um, and we know for a fact that the organization had some issues, some really bad issues behind it. And some things came out about the crookedness and the hidden agendas in that organization. But the dilemma, the issue that I've had with being able to even say Black Lives Matter was the pushback from white people and all lives matter. Instead of pausing and listen, and like we're doing right now, pushing in to listen to why black people are saying Black Lives Matter. And so there is this it's a complexity to it, in
Right.
that I'm not a fan of what the organization did. I'm not a fan of the angle and the theology behind the organization, but there are elements and pieces of it that make sense. And so when we backtrack now, we got to go back. You think about the times of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. You think about the Black Panthers, and all these different organizations. And I'm gonna be real with you, Bishop. Is some of these organizations, if the church, if the blood bought church, if the blood bought Christians would have taken their stand many, many, many years ago, there would not have been a need for a Black Panthers movement. There
Right.
would not have been a need
Come
for
on.
these other organizations that have come. There would not have been a need for a Black Lives Matter movement, anything, if the church, empowered by the Spirit of God, were to take its rightful place as those who are followers, true disciples of Jesus Christ, would have taken their place to stand for those who have been oppressed historically in America, those who have been lynched and murdered and raped in America historically. And we could talk about a Cotton Mather. We could talk about, I can name so many, George Whitefield. I could talk about so many different people who carried the labels as Christians, as evangelists, great evangelists. George Whitefield being one of the greatest evangelists from overseas, come here to minister and to say, this is how you deal with African Americans, and to do these things when he was a slave owner himself.
Right.
It's complex, right? You asked about Black Lives Matter. I know. Um, but it's so complex. Can I say, I would go on to say that in each and all of us there is villain and yet hero. That there, when we look at the life of David, like, there's villain and yet there's hero. And yet that God took this man and chose to allow him to be, I would just say, one of the forefathers of Jesus. This thing is so complex.
Right.
And so when I look at, when I think of the phrase BLM, when I think about the history of African Americans and Africans in this nation, and I look at the complicity of Christians, complicity specifically of white Christians who have had the power to bring change, but chose to be silent in that. But when there's anything that bucks the system, or that comes as a defense or a protector of Black people, then it's a problem.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that that is a white issue, or do you think that that's just a human issue in which we don't we don't buck the common thread enough, and we tend to, as humans, we tend to stay within a area in which we feel is safe instead of stepping out of it? Could it not could it would the tables Do we feel like the tables may have been turned if, let's imagine for just a moment, if instead of a European people finding America, if African people had found America, and if the entire tables had been turned, and the white man had been the slave for the African man, do we believe that this could be completely different? And I ask this because of what we're seeing right now in South Africa. and what is taking place there, in which there are groups that are openly going before their government and saying we should have the right to kill, murder, rape, and destroy the white farmers and get them off of our land, and they're doing it, and they're asking for their government to make it legal. So is it a white thing or is it a human thing?
I think it is a human thing, but then I'll also say that historically it has been a white issue. And I say that in the sense of what we've experienced in this nation. That when you look over history, that even when and I like I love the first. I'm gonna backtrack. I like what you said about a human issue because we like to stay comfortable,
Right.
we like to stay safe, and that even when, for example, Martin Luther King, when he was doing his thing, and many others, that he didn't get the support from the black community like he could have. And listen, I'll be real now. Make it real. I have people that look like me that push against my stance. And I'm not even like some pro black. I'm not this pro black dude walking around with my fist up 24/7. That's not me. But I'm comfortable enough to accept that who I am, my skin, what I look like, my ancestors, God was intentional about that.
Right.
And it means something to God. And so, yes, it is a human problem. But and in context of understanding racism and in context of understanding white supremacy, understanding whiteness, that we have to understand that there is colonialism. And in understanding colonialism, we have to understand who was in power, who's in control. And we'll see time and time after again that when black people historically have made some traction in America, there's been something done intentionally to set us back.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah,
Without
and
a doubt. And
and
to look at our history as a nation and to deny that is just absolutely absurd.
and that's where and real talk. This is where I get CRT, CRT, and there's this again back to the cognitive dissonance and this brainwashing that they're trigger words now. If I say woke, or if I say CRT, if I say certain things, people automatically go to oh, you're a Marxist. Oh, Bishop, why did you have a Marxist on your live? Why did you have a socialist on your live? And I'm none of those things. Everything that I've said, I can back up with scripture.
Right.
You know, and you wouldn't have me on here if you didn't know enough about me to trust to have this engagement. Um, so yeah, man, it's complicated. It's so complex. And like I said at the beginning, I can't I'm not afforded the opportunity to just walk away from the table because this is my life.
Right.
I live it. You know, and the only way that I could, even if I wanted to, would be to disassociate myself from how God made me. And I know brothers that look like me. I know sisters that look like me that challenge me and say, "Oh, brother, God doesn't see skin color." And I'm in my head, I'm like, "You don't shut your mouth."
But if he didn't see it, why'd he create it?
But
That I don't understand.
you know, so
I, there was do you know you've ever heard of Jesse Duplantis?
yes.
I love him. I love listening to him. But one of the things that he said years ago, I was a child whenever I heard it, and it stuck with me. And he talked about the fact that there are there are five different colors of people on the planet, and we're all a shade of one of those. And if we take a look at it, there's only five different colors of dirt on the planet, and shades of those. And so when we take a look in the scripture and we see that God formed man and created man after out of the dust of the earth, he knew he could have taken only just one of those. He could have just created us out of just one, but instead he took all of it and created us with it. And so we serve a God. We serve a God who is creative for one,
Hmm.
but a God of uniqueness, and a God of creativity, and a God who really truly, I believe, finds joy in our differences. And when we as a church try to look at it and say, no, there is no difference. Yes, there is. There is a difference, and we should find joy. Miles Monroe spoke about that years and years ago, and he
Hmm.
talked about a truly healthy church isn't going to be healthy unless they can get people from all the different races within. Because, and I wish I could find that message in which he talked about race, and he talked about the different things that the races brought in to a church. And he was talking about one of the things that Miles Monroe had said was that the white man brings administration, the black man brings passion, the what he said, I want to say he said that the Asian man brings an analytical mind. And he ended up bringing in multiple different races to the picture, and I wish I could find all of it. But as he was talking about it, he began to break it down to the point. He was saying, listen, if we don't bring everyone together, we're not going to be able to move forward.
Yeah, that's right. And it makes me think about there's a book I haven't dug into. It's called The Sum of Us,
Hmm.
and it deals with how, because it's the opposite side of what you just said, that racism hurts all of us,
Right.
right? And on the flip side, as you mentioned, that when we learn the beauty of our differences and that we create a table where everyone can sit, that's when the magic happens.
But we can't do that if we allow the enemy to keep frustrating this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we allow the enemy to keep pulling us apart and saying, you know what, again, we go back to uh, a refusal to recognize each person's experience,
Hmm.
and a refusal. I I had I asked a question one time in which someone was extremely angry. They were very, very angry, and they wanted. And I kind of did it just to see what would happen, but I also was curious. And they were very angry about slavery in the United States. And we were having a discussion about Juneteenth, and
A black
we were
person.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and we were having a discussion about Juneteenth. They were very angry about it, and they were making demands for reparations and saying that the United States should pay them because of what their great grandparents had gone through. And they made the mistake of looking at me and saying, "What your great grandparents did to mine." At which point I was like, "You don't know who my great grandparents were. You don't know who they were. You don't know that we owned anybody." I was like, I come from an Irish and Scottish upbringing. We were, prior to, I mean, just being transparent, prior to prior to uh, prior to the Europeans going into Africa, the Irish man and the Scottish man, we were the slaves for Europe until they found a much larger continent to pull from.
Yeah.
We were. And I was like, but hold on. Let's back up for just a second, because you're angry about slavery that ended hundreds of years ago here. Granted, we're still seeing issues. I said, but what about what about the what about the slaves right now that are in the Sudan? Are we not angry about that? At which point I was immediately told that, why is it that every time we try to talk about slavery and what happened in this country, all you want to do is point at something that's happening right now? And I asked the question because I wanted to know, is this, if the issue is slavery, then shouldn't we as a people, shouldn't we be frustrated and upset about it still happening today? If the issue really truly is slavery, then shouldn't we have an issue with our young girls and our young boys that are being taken off the streets and sold into slavery right now in this country?
Yeah.
Um, or is the issue more of I'm just angry? Give me your thoughts. What, am I wrong for the question?
I don't think you're wrong for the question. And I believe that that is a response, a type of response that a lot of Black people get. Um, and I think this goes back to not dealing with uh, generationally, not being able to have truth telling in the reality of what has happened in this nation. There's a book that I'd recommend. I got a whole list of books,
I
but there's
bet you
one
do.
there's one called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Joy DeGroy, and I will make sure you get that information. But I gotta paint a picture. It's again, it's complicated. Um, it feels like deflection. Yes, yes, Miss Michelle. It feels like deflection in the sense that if I came to you with a wound, if I came to you and my arm is cut and I'm bleeding, um, but you see somebody else down the street who also has a cut, but I want you to tend to my wound right now. But you say, well, what about old boy down the street? Like, no, I don't. I want you to focus on me right here, right now, because it hasn't been addressed. And so with that, and I've experienced it. Like I want to talk about this nation, our history, and it's often to turn to other things. Not that they're irrelevant, but I think that we have to learn how to address the other issues, but also deal with what has happened here. So much so that African Americans and people of the diaspora, people of African descent, or the descendants of African slaves in this nation, there's never been any reparations. When there has been, historically, has been reparations for indigenous people, there has been reparations for Asians and others. And so then the question that has been circulated even now in research done, what is the holdback from reparations being given to African Americans in this nation? That's a whole nother, that's a look, that's a whole seminar, brother. And
That's
so
not something. That's not something we can answer here.
yeah, no, it's not. I ain't even gonna open that, but I'm just talking about what we're talking about. And it is I'll tell you what happened to me. Um I was in the presence of police officers where I was doing a training, and I was talking a little bit. I didn't even go deep. I barely touched the surface, but I mentioned slavery. Somebody in the back of the room literally jumped. They're all in full uniform. Jumped up in the back of the room. Well, my people were slaves too. I'm tired of hearing this. Blah blah blah. I'm done. And he stormed out of the room. And I'm just like, okay. So it is that deflection. It is that, no, I'm not going to deal with this. It feels like I don't want to talk about your issues. I don't want to deal with what you've been through. Slavery's over. Let's just move on. Let's just deal with what's happening right now, when there's been no true investment or desire to bring transformation or change on a bigger scale when it comes to this nation.
Well,
Um,
let me ask you. What do you feel that that looks like?
um, I think some of that looks like learning how to not evading a community, because there are too many people that look like me.
Okay, go a little deeper into that.
Okay, I have a friend in Roanoke, Virginia, right now, who has a church in a predominantly black community that was not always a predominantly black community. It used to be predominantly white. The pastors of the church, before he became the pastor or the owner of the church, was shut down. The church was just a standing brick and mortar. Before that, it was a predominantly white church, and the community started to change. More black families started to flood the community. Instead of dealing with that and embracing that, they apparently got a call from God to uproot the church and start in another location.
Mm.
Right, the gentrification as well. But in this situation, it was the white flight. What if, this is a thought, what if they would have found someone as the people started to come in, allow someone with the call of God in their life to rise up in that community and then take over the church and then start a sister church somewhere else or branch off, but allow that community to still have that place of worship, build it up, and embrace the culture.
Or why leave at all?
Wiley, sir.
It,
And look, real quick, I'm gonna let you talk. This is a thought. And the only reason why there is a black church today is because the white churches didn't want us in theirs.
I,
One.
I can't deny that.
That's
They
the
still
only.
don't want you in them.
It's the only reason there's a black church today.
They still don't want you in them.
And they still don't. This is the only reason. And this is historically, it's historical facts. You can look at Azusa Street, you can look at Baptist, you can look at Methodist, you go anywhere you want. We got receipts. And now my point here, Bishop, too, is that because I'm able to say these things and I am passionate, it doesn't mean that I have hate in my heart. It doesn't mean I'm trying to shame anybody. It doesn't mean I'm trying to make anybody feel guilty, but it is a matter of telling the truth. And what does the word of God say? It is the truth that makes man free. And there cannot be any type of reconciliation. There cannot be any type of multi-ethnic movement. There cannot be a full expression of the kingdom of God in the earth when truth is absent.
Right.
Go ahead,
Absolutely.
sir.
Absolutely. So, all right, back up real quick to the idea of the church that fell caught. Okay, so my response to that, if I'm facing that kind of a deal, is very simple. Say, find yourself. What I would have said to that church, and what I would have said to the pastor, whoever the pastor was in that position. First, get over yourself. Second, find yourself a black man or a black woman who is called of God. Put them on staff. Put them on staff. Learn
And
from
give
them.
them voice.
Yes. I don't want. Let me be honest with you. I don't want a token black man. I don't want one.
That's not family.
No, it's not. That's just a trophy, and I don't have room for trophies. So a trophy can't produce anything.
Sir.
So I don't want a trophy. I want somebody that's got authority to actually go out and make changes and do something. So that to me is not gonna happen. So I can't even look here. That frustrates me so much.
We got
So
we
much
got
that
this part too.
it frustrates me so much, man. It's just I've dedicated my life. I've devoted my life in this area to try and unite the black church and the white church. To try and come across this and say, okay, we are brother and sister. Like there's no reason that we should have a black church, that we should have a white church, that we should. There is none. for this. And I've had to have honest conversations with my staff and honest conversations with some of my people because Pastor Michelle, look
My
here,
goodness.
just a moment of jesting with that. Us white people are more colored than you are. We turn green, we turn red, we turn purple, we more colored than you are. So just we're not even.
I won't call you my translucent brother.
Mercy.
Don't choke, sir.
God Almighty, Jesus. So, um, I went. It was probably about a year ago that I was called a racist, um, by a whole bunch of people on Facebook. I put out a post on Facebook, and I said that what I needed. She talked about the clearer saints.
Clear.
Oh, but it
Uh,
was probably about a year or so ago. I put out a post saying, "Hey, I'm looking for I'm looking for a black drummer who can come in and replace me on this team." Because everybody else on the team were white. I'm looking for a black drummer because I'm trying to be intentional about creating an atmosphere in which my brothers and sisters are feel like they have a place and feel like they're welcome and feel like, hey, this is my thing. So I've told our worship team many years ago, you ain't playing a bunch of white music. We got to go in and we got to. I want gospel. I want a mix of multiple different styles of music to be played. But the moment that I said I was looking for a black drummer, I got told that I am. You weren't on the team at the time, Elijah. Shut up.
come out of your offense.
Right. That's my brother, man. He's been with me. He's been with me now for 14 years and has stood by my side. And without him, I would not be able to do the things that I've done. He's been fantastic in my life. So, but there's a I was told that because I was looking specifically for a black individual that I was racist.
Hmm.
And I was like, y'all have got to be kidding me. Like there's a part of this, if we want to be intentional. That's right, Travis. If we want to be intentional about this, that we as leadership have to say, okay, we've got to come to a point where we say, okay, this is what we're looking for, this is what we're wanting, and we have to become intentional about making that shift happen. And sometimes that means looking at it because I told my pastor staff, I told them probably 5 years ago. We sat down and I told him, I said, the next pastor that I bring on staff here is going to be black. And they were like, well, what if we have a really great white pastor come on board? That's not what I said. We can have a really great white pastor. There's a whole bunch of great white pastors. I'm looking for a black man who can come on, who I can say, this man has a voice. This man is able to lead. This man, and we have one. We have one now, and he is unbelievable. He's an incredible man of God. I love him dearly. And I told them after he came on board, I said, okay, next one I'm getting. I said, next pastor's coming on staff. I want it to be Hispanic. I want it to be Hispanic. And Veritas is run a little differently than most churches. And the way we run things, we're a pastor led church. So we don't have our people don't vote on anything. We don't have deacons that tell us what to do or how to do anything. I lead the church from a perspective of I'm the bishop, but each of the pastors have their own areas that they're responsible for. And as long as they're meeting our mission, which is to see the birth, growth, and maturity of believers, I don't care how they do what they do. So just do your job. Do your job and love people. So as long as you're doing that, I don't I don't care. So they have full authority if they've got something that they want to do. And I've had people come and ask me, "Can you change this?" No. You go talk to the pastor who's in charge of it. And so we've created where our pastors when they have that position, guess what? Pastor Maria talk about Hispanic. Yes, you are. I love you, and you are definitely one of my pastors. I want a Hispanic Pastor Maria that speaks Spanish. I love you. Bye. But um, I love her. She's the prophet of this house, and she is fantastic. So, but I think that, and we've touched on it a little bit,
Mhm.
in which, as Travis was talking about just a second ago, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. We do have a lot of these churches who say we want we want an integrated congregation, and they put somebody on staff, but they don't give them a voice.
Yeah, and I
But
would
it's
go a
that.
little I go a little deeper.
Go ahead.
Um, is your dinner table ever integrated in your house?
Look here.
That's the issue. If look, if your life, if your home isn't integrated, your church isn't going to be integrated.
Right.
Because it has to be, listen, it has to be, I like to call it reconciliatory fortitude, where we take on the model of Paul when he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that when I'm with the Gentiles, guess what? I'm a Gentile. When I'm with the Jews, I'm a Jew. When I'm with whoever, that's who I become. Why? So that I can win some. But if I am not able to sit at a table or create a table in my own home of hospitality where people can come in who are different from me, when people can come in, I'll go even further. The people who don't believe like I believe, an integrated table, then my church isn't going to be integrated.
Right.
But I want to go to Africa. I want to go to I want to go to the country of Africa. You ever heard that one? Africa. I still got people saying Africa is a country. Well, I want to go to Africa on a missions trip for a week and help babies with bloated bellies because they're apparently starving, and they got flies flying around their mouth, and they need our help. They need our American Christian help because they need to be saved because they're poor. And Africa is not poor,
Right.
but yet we can't talk to our neighbor or go 15 miles down the road to a community that has descendants of people from Africa.
Come on.
We can't deal with people in our own nation that look like them because we can't handle dealing with the byproducts of what our nation created because it touches too close to home. Then I got to sit in the reality of just maybe, and maybe my grandfather, my great grandfather, or my great great grandmother was outside watching your ancestors hanging from a tree after Sunday service.
That's right.
It's so deep. It's But then on the flip side, Bishop, me as an African American, as a black man, that I have to have a level of grace and long suffering and forgiveness and so much more. The Spirit of Christ that would say they know not what they do,
Right.
right? To where I'm able to sit with people at the table in my discomfort as well and have conversation. I know a man personally in my life who's a white Christian who is actually, you know, the story Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yep.
His relatives in the book.
Oh boy.
He's a descendant of the evil white guy in the book. It's deep, but he doesn't run from that.
Right.
He embraces it. But in Christianity, or at least in American Christianity, that we think that Jesus has his blood has caused us to evade or erase or run away from discomfort. Jesus saved me so I don't have to be uncomfortable anymore.
Come on. Come on now.
So
You know,
yeah, man, we got to be able to create tables of people that don't look like us, and that I make them comfortable while I sit in my discomfort. But we don't. We have distorted and twisted the gospel. We have distorted and twisted discipleship. We have distorted and twisted who Jesus really is so much that we don't know how to love people that don't look like us, that don't think
right.
like us, that don't act like us. Brother, we're missing it.
But we still have the majority of the American church who thinks that Jesus was a white man. Like, this is the issue. He wasn't white. You want to see what Jesus looked like? He was Middle Eastern. The scripture tells us what he looks like. He was a Jewish man, a Middle Eastern man. Go look at our brothers and sisters in Egypt. That's probably close to what you're going to see to what Jesus looked like. And if I'm not mistaken, Egypt is in what continent?
It's in the country of Africa.
Oh, right. But we don't. It's not. It's not taught.
Yeah, I'm gonna write a book on that.
Do it. I'll read it.
This is gonna be a small, quick read on the many faces of Jesus. And I'm just telling you what it's gonna be about. That every culture has an image of Jesus.
Right.
There's an Ethiopian Jesus, there's a Russian Jesus, there's a Filipino Jesus, there's a Hispanic Jesus, there's a Brazilian Jesus, and the list goes on. But only one was used to oppress people.
Right.
Now, it's not problematic. It is there is a space for, and this might bother some people, but oh well. There is a space for a white Jesus to exist because white people exist. But the problem is when that individual is used to cause harm to God's creation.
Right.
And that's the part that nobody wants to talk about.
Well, we tend to forget that Christ came to set the captive free. He came to set the captive free. And so anytime that the scripture is used to oppress the people, anytime that scripture is used to hold somebody back, anytime that scripture is used to control somebody,
Come on.
that's not Christianity.
That's witchcraft.
Yes. That goes not just for looking at it and trying to control a race. It also goes into trying to control women and tell women that they don't have the freedom to speak.
Sir. Yeah, come on
It
with this
covers the whole
gospel.
thing. When he came to set the captive free, he meant the captives.
And Jesus protected women. Boom.
Right.
Argue with your mama.
No, you don't know my mama. I ain't my mama. Mm-mm.
He protected women. He did.
That's right. That's right. Without a doubt. Now, you and I've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh Lord.
And it don't feel like that. It never feels like that. I
It
love
does.
these conversations. I really do. And we could continue to go. We could continue to go for quite a while. But I wanna open up the floor, and because we've got several people who are watching, and Pastor Michelle talk about all mamas matter.
Come on.
All mamas matter. But I wanna open up the floor to those who may have a question for you, to ask you what's on their mind, what's on their heart, and see if we can't get a little bit more, um, more time in here, and then before we close out, I've got two questions I'm going to ask you. Same questions I ask everybody before we leave. And it's just kind of a rapid fire deal. But if you've got questions for Pastor JJ, do me a favor. Go ahead, post them in the comments. Ask your questions, and we'll see what he has to say about them. And again, nothing's off limits. So whatever question you got, throw it out there. He's from my understanding, he is not scared to answer a question. So go ahead. You know what though? I do have one more for you while we're waiting on some of these to come through.
Come on, sir.
Because you mentioned that I think your spiritual father and your oversight is Apostle Ryan. He's a
Right.
white man.
Hmm.
So how has that been for you as somebody who has been intentional about looking to bridge that gap? You have done it. You've been intentional, and even down who you have welcomed into your life as your spiritual father to learn from, that leads you, that has the authority to speak into your life as a father and say, JJ, slow it down.
Hmm.
um, Talk to me about it. What is that? How's that experience been? Have you caught flack for that?
I probably have secretly, and actually, I have caught some, um, but it doesn't bother me because I know who I am.
Right.
I'm not seeking the approval of people, and I'm not even seeking his validation in who I am. And I think the problem with even with coverings, spiritual father, whatever people want to call it, is that some do it to seek validation and healing from a source that God never intended to be that.
Right.
And so for me, I know that there is supernatural impact. There's a supernatural connection. There's a supernatural mandate that God has for people beyond ethnic barriers. And so I'm not looking to him or anybody else to feel something in me as if there's something wrong with me.
Come on.
And furthermore, I do not live with a mindset of I don't have bitterness in my heart towards white people. I don't have hate in my heart towards white people. I don't have this vendetta or this vengeful mindset or this idea that white people are out to get me because I'm not scared of white people.
Right.
And so I hope that helps gets to what you want.
Well, I was curious because I have a couple of sons who are black, and they've been asked, why do you go to that white church? Why do you let that white man talk to you?
Yeah, that's because they're still wounded.
So I was curious what your experience had been with that.
Yeah, I've had some, and I speak on a greater scale too. That I've been good, but he's been through a lot because I mean he's like a he's like a little white man trapped in a black body. I mean he's a little black man trapped in a white body, and I say that because he is a global man of God. He he moves and navigates in a way that I've never seen personally. Um, and I think it's because of his life experience and because of things that he's been through in his own and his personal life. Um, that he has been able that the Lord has positioned him to be able to be so empathic, um, to get people that are black. And it's just he carries that and everybody sees it and he's lost. He is sacrificed being at certain tables. He's lost opportunities. He's lost followers. He's lost things in his own life because of his desire to embrace where God has planted him. I don't know anybody like him. He's just he's one of a kind, man, and I honor him. I'll say it. I'll shout it from the rooftop that my apostle, that's my dude. Not in a way like he's my buddy. No, he's not. He's not my buddy. But when I say that's my dude, like he's my man. Like, yo, he's something that I've never seen before. He's an anomaly,
That's fantastic.
and he
I love
stands
to
for us.
I love to hear you say that. So I love it. And there's and I've got a couple of questions that are coming in. So if you've got questions that you would like to ask Pastor JJ, go ahead and post them in the comments, and I will get to them in just a second. We've got a couple that are there. Um, I, talking to talking to that aspect of it, we've got two churches here in our community that I love their pastors dearly. One is both of them would be considered black churches, and
Mhm.
it's interesting to me how every time that I've done something with them, or that we have gone to their service, or um, tried to do an event with them and connect with them, that shortly after it being made public that we have, some of the white churches in the area will ask me, well, hey, why don't you come do something like that with us instead?
Instead,
Yeah. Or why don't you ask us to do that? Why are you always talking to black churches? And I'm like, um, because of that. Because of that, I don't even want to be around you.
and that's racism.
Yeah. I'll let Jesus love you.
That's white supremacy.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. All right. So one of the questions that came through, from Champ, he says, is the average black person afraid of a white person?
Um, I'm gonna say initially no, but maybe there is a an innate sense that there's a potential that there could be danger. That makes sense. Um, there is a history. This you got to understand that when you look at things, I can't separate any of this from history,
Right.
and we got to look at things in a historical way. And I'm not talking about people watching media and what the media pumps out. I'm talking about true, real history. That over time, that if you are part of a people group in a place that is seen over and over and over and over and over again, things happen to your people from another group that looks like a specific person. Do you think that there's going to be some subconscious ideas or thoughts about those people? So in that, you got to understand that when you come to the table and over time your people have been conditioned to think that you're less than. There you go, Elijah. Some distrust, not fear, but some distrust. There's some like reservation with a lot of black people. Okay, champ. He said makes sense. Okay. There's more to it, but yeah, okay.
All right. Let's see. My daughters would like to know, what's your favorite book of the Bible? This is from Esther and Lily, two of my daughters.
Romans.
Book of what? Come on, Romans.
Yep. I could live off Romans.
Tell
You
me
could
why.
take the rest of them, you could take every book of the Bible away, and I would live off Romans.
Tell me why.
Yo, Paul and his this theological approach to everything he deals with in that book, man, is sick.
That's
And
a
for
that's an
me,
analytical legal mindset that is able to take Romans and say, I love it. Like
and but
that.
now the heart of Romans for me is Romans chapter 12. It gives for me, it gives a solution of how every Christian should treat every person.
Come on. Look,
And listen,
go ahead.
man, you go into Romans chapter 12, you start off at verse 1 and 2. I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service.
Come on.
But be not conformed to this world, but be ye
Be ye transformed.
transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
Come
Now,
on.
if that is the framework and the foundation of how you believe, how can you treat anybody wrong?
That's right.
If you have been renewed and transformed by the Spirit of God.
Look, I
Listen,
preached off Romans chapter 12, verse 2 for 6 months.
listen.
I love it.
And then he gets into that chapter talking about hospitality and how you treat people. What? That's my book.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice. Look, like I said, I've preached off Romans chapter 12, verse 2 for 6 months before. I love it, man. Absolutely love it. All right, let's see. We've got a couple more. Where is All right, here we go.
And I got a
This
fun
is
fact
from
about Romans too. Remind me later.
All right, from my wife. What is the way that white people can hear and be understanding of what black people have gone through as far as racism without adding fuel to the fire or deflection? What is the proper response?
I think part of the proper response is learning first internally how to decenter yourself. And then in that moment, if it is a conversation or if it's a relationship you're trying to build, it is how do I say this? It's the being the quick to listen, slow to get angry, and it is this being able to not have the desire to be right,
That part.
not having the desire to be right, and pressing in that when I share my story, that you're able to then sometimes not say anything at all. Sometimes understanding requires you not to have a response.
Say that again.
Sometimes understanding requires you not to have a response. And in that, when a person is sharing their story, or when a person is sharing their experience, that you are able to, or that anyone is able to wait until they're ready for your response. Because Black people, honestly, I'll be real, Black people have been wounded because of their desire or their thinking that they're in a safe place where they can be vulnerable. And their vulnerability gets weaponized against them. Or their vulnerability is invalidated by facts. And so I think in that, really wanting to understand without the deflecting, first really starts with self-awareness. Because if a person isn't aware of themselves and aware of their own emotions, aware of their own story, and this is a little sidebar, but it's a part of this, you know, to my dear white brothers and sisters in Christ, you have ethnicity and you therefore have culture. Whether you're Irish or Scottish, Polish, the list goes on, you have ethnic roots too. And it's not America. All right? you have an ethnic lineage, and I'm mentioning that because when we learn to know ourselves, we are better able to know other people. But if I don't know how to embrace who I really am, right? But that's what the mistakes, the history, the insecurities, my mama, my crackhead daddy, my crackhead mama, and my the incest in my family, and the list goes on, and all those things. If I can't sit and wrestle with my own stuff, guess what? If I don't learn how to be vulnerable with myself, I'm not going to know how to listen to or embrace anything that anybody has to say from another culture.
Right.
Okay. So,
I think I think that the listening to the experience, listening to it is the validation of a wound that prepares it for healing.
my God.
And when we don't validate the wound, the wound may, in all honesty, all right, let's be honest, the wound in and of itself may be superficial. In many instances it may be superficial, but because there's a refusal to validate it, even a superficial wound is painful.
Mm,
And when we don't validate that a wound is there, when we deny it, it has a tendency to grow, and it has a tendency to become gangrenous, so to speak, in which that becomes the only thing that individual can focus on.
I got to drop a nugget in here because that's powerful. Now, I want you all, my brothers and sisters, listen to this and just think about this historically. That when Africans and African Americans came out of slavery, who offered to, and when we were going through, right? We think about the abuse, um, the rape, the use, especially black women, and the use of their bodies by slave masters and all those things. I'm not going into all the details, but who offered spiritual healing, who offered them emotional healing, who offered them counseling for their trauma. And then when they came out of slavery, who offered those things? And someone just mentioned generational trauma. Now I want you to, y'all know about compound interest. Now compound that, all those wounds. I'm not talking about 2 or 3 years, y'all. We're talking about hundreds of years,
Multiple generations.
multiple generations. As some were building generational wealth, a lot of people that look like me were building generational trauma with no access to mental health care. So much so that when there was time that this was possible, that they were categorizing black people as having certain disorders or issues when it was really something else, or beyond treatment because we were black. And that's, I ain't going into all of it, but y'all get the picture. There's just a little nugget to think about.
Right.
Woo.
I think, there was, we had touched on it a little bit earlier, on the fact that there has been, without a doubt, there have been roadblocks and obstacles that have been thrown in the way of healing
Yeah.
in general. Uh, but I would also say that it's important for us to, one, recognize everything that has taken place, recognize everything has happened, but also recognize, we have to, as a people, also have to recognize how far we have come. In order, if we refuse to recognize where we are today, then we're never going to be willing to say, okay, somebody is trying to work on this.
Yeah.
At that point, we're just being hurt over and over and over and over. And is the system fixed? No, no. But it's a whole lot closer to it than what it was 50 years ago. It's a
Facts.
whole lot closer to it than what it was 100 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Um, I had because I'm also a paramedic, and I
Used
had
to be EMT.
I had a patient who I absolutely loved her, and she was 103 years old, and a little old black lady, 103 years old, just she, her mind was as sharp as a tack, man. And I hated it, but I loved getting the call to her house,
Mm,
because I hated it because I was like, if I ever walk into this place and she's not breathing, I'm not going to be able to handle this. But I loved it because she and I would talk the entire way to the hospital, and we would talk about life, and I wanted to know what life, because she can remember her father telling her stories of being a slave, because her father had her late in life, and he was in his hundreds when he died. And so she can remember stories of her grandfather being, living in that, and telling her dad and all. And so she and I would talk, and I can remember the first time that I walked into her house, and she was a little bit concerned that, I mean, I'm not a little dude. I've never been a little dude. And so to have a big burly bearded white man come walking into your house at 2 o'clock in the morning, because you hit your life alert, and not know who I am, that puts you at a disadvantage. And so
come on,
that
sir.
first time that I saw her, she was a little nervous, and so I, got down on my knees, talked with her, and my name for her was Grandma. That's what I called her. The first time that I saw her was Grandma,
That's awesome.
because I mean she was 103. She Grandma. I don't care.
Grandma.
I don't. That's Grandma. And so being able to listen to some of the stories that she had was absolutely phenomenal.
Mm.
And being able to hear some of the things that she's experienced would break my heart. And so she and what really destroyed me one day is we were on the way to the hospital, and she looked at me, and she was holding my hand, and because she had just that night she just wasn't feeling good. And so we were right in the hospital, and I kind of patted her on her hand, and when I patted her on her hand, she grabbed my hand and she just held it, and she looked at me and she said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" And I said, I'm just doing my job, sweetheart. That's what I'm doing." And she said, "No." She said, "Thank you." And I was like, "Talk to me. What's going on?" And she said, "There was a time that I would have never thought that I would see a man like you care about a woman like me." And
Listen.
that that night broke me. It broke me, because beginning to realize that we as Christ followers have failed
Mm.
in restoring this, and really all it takes is just simply, some, as you had said earlier, sometimes it just means us listening, just listening, not having to be there, and not having to be heard, but just listening. And that night, man, I fell even more deeply in love with her. And when the day came that she passed away, I was distraught. But she was an amazing individual. But we have some other questions. We have, let's see. Amy says, as a mother, as a white mother of biracial children, what advice would you give to encourage, uplift, and aid them in navigating life with both races and not putting one above the other? Is that possible, do you think?
No. When I say no, I'm not saying in a sense of putting, I don't mean no in the view of one is better than the other, but depending on how your child looks, society is going to treat them a certain way. So um love is not enough. You can't just, love is not going to protect them from the cruelty of society. Just saying, oh, I'm just going to love them isn't going to protect them from the mean and cruel things and ways that people are going to treat them, because they are different. And so the power here is that they will be able to shift and to navigate in and out. But because of the way our society is, they're going to be treated like the other. And so in navigating that, it is the beauty of both. And honestly, I think when it comes to having biracial, multiracial children, or being a biracial person, I think it beautifies the power of God in a new way, and it really it like it stabs, it stabs racism in the neck, in the jugular, because the very thing that was often seen as untouchable both ways, right? That is untouchable to you because it's too good for you. And that is untouchable for you because it's not worth being touched. But now the beauty of the two being blended, um, and I've had a lot of people, personal conversations with people who are biracial and just trying to figure out where they fit in. And so this sense of belonging, that I want to belong to something. So I would say also take time to learn more from the voices of biracial people, and um, and understanding what it means from the perspective of biracial people who choose to say that they're black, and why that matters and why they say that. Not just, oh, that's just what they're saying, I'm just going to go with that, but understand why that is a thing, and understanding why that is something, um, that is an issue still prevalent even today.
Where do we as a church come into that? When we look at, and I know that we had said earlier that it's understanding our culture and where we come from is a beautiful thing. Excuse me. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing. But at the same time, whenever I read scripture that tells me there is neither male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile,
Hmm.
understanding that first, as a Christ follower, what is most important in my life is not my heritage. What is most important in my life is the kingdom culture that I'm supposed to be reaching to. That is who I'm becoming. That's who I am.
Right. So that in Ephesians, so in that context, he was addressing the tearing down of a wall, and in this, only one group had access, right? And so in that, saying that, yo, those things aren't barriers anymore, and in those things not being barriers anymore, that now everyone has access to the covenant, as you mentioned, right? Everybody got access to the covenant. Not that those things erased, but now there's nothing that's going to keep anybody from receiving the benefit that I had initially planned to be for my chosen people. And so I love that you said that, though, Bishop, because how is it that we can be supernaturally connected to God in the spirit, but so divided when it comes to things of the flesh, and be so divided because of the differences that we see day to day instead of embracing them? It is almost like a mystery. Well, that's the fall, the fall of man, that um we have to deal with this flesh, and we got to bring this flesh under subjection to the spirit.
I think that also goes back to your favorite book, Romans, in which the Apostle Paul says, "How are they going to know without a preacher?" And if this is something that we're not having conversations about, if this is something we're not talking about because it's uncomfortable, how can we expect people to know? How can we expect people to really truly understand what it means to be free in Christ? What it means to what is the kingdom culture? What is this thing that we're supposed to be reaching for.
Yeah.
Um, Apostle Michelle asked, "Do you have children? And if boys, did you ever have the talk with them?"
I have two sons, 11 and 13. And so we've had different versions of the talk, but not that one yet because they're not driving. But conversation is about to heat up real quick because my oldest is 13 and he's almost 6 feet wearing a size
Jail.
14. So he doesn't look like a 13-year-old. He could easily pass for 16, 17 because of his physical size. And so thank you for asking that because it made me think about a story when my son was my oldest son, when he was in the fourth grade, predominantly white classroom. The teacher is teaching on the Civil War. And one of the little white girls in the class, she was going to split the class into the two armies, um, Confederate and the Union. And the little white girl stood up in the class and said, "So what does that mean? Are we going to, all of us going to chase Peter around?" And my son looks at this little girl and says, "That's inappropriate. You can't say that to me." In the fourth grade, the fourth grade. And he looks at the teacher and says, "Isn't that right, Miss So and so?" And the teacher was white. The problem I have with that is that my son, at the age of 8, had to defend himself surrounded by whiteness. So it goes back to something I said earlier on. Listen, my brothers and sisters in Christ, my lighter brothers and sisters, my clearer Christians, listen to me. And when I say that we got to live this every day of our life, I just gave you an example of what that really means. That and yes, environment matters. You know, where you grow up is different. But he had to experience that at the age of 8, right? So we've had variations of the talk, and it's starting to heat up because I have learned the skill of having G rated, PG rated, PG 13, R rated conversations with my sons. And the reason, Bishop, and I believe we still have African American or other people of color, sons and daughters who are growing up with this hatred in their heart towards white people, is because their parents are still wounded and they're speaking from a dirty filter. They're speaking from their wounds and giving R-rated conversations to children who should only be getting G-rated information.
Come on, that's the whole truth right there.
But it's also happening with white children.
Yep, without a doubt.
My son just told us a story today of a kid who is he's not white, he's from another nation, but made a comment um, about immigrants. And my son challenged him and told him why he shouldn't be saying that and then it's not appropriate. You know, talking about immigrants being illegal and people being here and saying all kinds of this stuff. And my son was like, "You want to be real about it?" He didn't say it exactly like this, but "You want to be real about it? All of us are immigrants." I mean,
Right.
he said some other little things, but then another girl, the Hispanic girl in the back, started jumping on this kid because he kept saying stuff that was just way off. But he got it from somewhere, right? We get this stuff from places, from sources.
Well, it
Okay,
comes down, age appropriate conversation.
age appropriate conversation.
We teach our kids things that they shouldn't know yet.
Nope.
We destroy their innocence, and
Boom.
often we destroy their innocence because of our own wounds.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we create wounds because it's a weight and a burden that they shouldn't be carrying yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as parents, it's our job to carry those burdens until the day they're old enough and they're mature enough to carry them.
Yeah.
And
Because we end up. Go ahead.
when we end up giving it to them at too early of an age, we disrupt so much of their development.
Yeah. We normalize toxicity.
Hmm. Without a doubt. You know, we're going to wrap up here shortly, but it takes me back, and I think I shared with you a little bit my own experience with law enforcement, my own experience a while back, and something that our family had faced, and my children watching law enforcement pretty much bully me and draw a weapon on me, and to a point that for probably a good there's still times in which my children who witness that they're very uneasy around law enforcement, and to the point that I've had to share with them, and we have had to be very diligent and say no. Um, that officer was doing what he had been trained to do. He was doing what he did to protect himself. He was he in the wrong? Yes, without a doubt. But we don't dislike them because of what happened. There was some stuff. There was a whole lot of things, but we've had to tell our children, calm down. It's all right.
Hmm.
They're not here. They're not here to hurt us. They're not here to take us away. Uh, but we've had to. Now there's going to come a day in which we have to have another conversation with our children as well.
Yep.
But it was not the time. Now they witnessed that at a young age, and it's caused some trauma in their life. And I can only imagine if it was something that they witnessed over and over and over and over again. And so it's man, it's heavy what we put our kids through in times that they should not be experiencing some of those things. So, all right, we could keep going. We've been going for 2 hours now, and we've got to wrap up. And hopefully, I can have you come back in the future, and we can talk about this a little bit more, and actually look at some more things that we can do as a church to fix these, and what we can do independently as churches in order to bridge this gap. But I've got two questions I want to throw at you, um, just to kind of wrap up. And the first one is what was the most impactful book you have ever read when it comes to your life?
Other than the Bible.
Yeah, other than the Bible. That's a cop out answer.
Yeah. The Bible. No.
Yeah,
Oh,
Romans.
right now to date, it's a newer book, and it really just rocked my boat because of how I live and how it really resonated with me. It's called The Sacred Overlap.
The Sacred Overlap.
Hmm. J.R. Briggs. It is a book about living in attention. And so the premise of the book really deals with how Jesus lived more a both and life rather than an either or life. And as Christians, we're called to live a both and, in the sense that, uh, when you look at I wish I had two circles. When you look at a Venn diagram,
Right.
right? And it's that middle piece, like that middle piece. I'm not throwing up gang signs, y'all. The middle piece.
There's a disclaimer.
Oh Lord. But the middle piece in the Venn diagram, that almond shape, is called a
Hmm.
mandorla. And when you go look at some of the early century art with Jesus, when you ever see Jesus and he's like this in the middle, He's in that shape, that almond shape called a mandorla,
Right.
because that is the centerpiece of the Venn diagram. And it is all those things in the middle. Jesus is he part is he 50%, is he 30% man and 70% God? No.
Come on.
He's 100% man and 100% God. And when you look at his teachings, how he dealt with things, a lot of the things he said were both and, right? You look at the Beatitudes and you look at so many different things. He takes this approach. And so, but it's about living in the tension. It's learning how to live in the middle. We're not polarized. We're not far extreme right. We're not far left, but we live in the middle. And he talks about things like, justice and grace, discipleship and evangelism. And he goes down a list of different areas where we have to learn how to live in that space in the middle and deal with that tension and that discomfort. Yeah, sacred overlap. And it's living in the space in between by J.R. Briggs, The Sacred Overlap. I wish every Christian would read that book, because what it does, Bishop, that book is really transformed. No, not transformed. It is enhanced and verified how I live my life. And people have a hard time with me because I do live in the middle. And it allows us, Bishop, to be who we are,
Well,
then also,
if you live in the middle, I can't label you.
and that's what people have a hard time doing with me.
Nice.
And that's how.
I went ahead and added it to my Amazon cart, so it's
Okay.
there. It's
Yeah.
there. I'm gonna have to get it and take a look
No,
at it.
it's so good.
So, all right, last question for you, and we'll wrap up. But the last question for you is: if there was any one thing that you could change about the church as a whole right now today, what would it be?
All right, I'm just gonna give you my first thought. Is how they understand discipleship. I'd get them to reimagine discipleship.
Walk that out.
All right. I think that we are so individualistic in America, um, that we have this isolated view of what it's like to really live out a Christian life. So much to where we think that Sunday service is enough,
Come on.
and that we will leave that space and go back into our isolated life. And that Jesus, he did die for you, but Ephesians isn't about you. It's about the family of God. Look, let's go back to Genesis. Did he say, let me create?
Come on.
He didn't say, let me. He
Let
said,
us.
us. He started from community. The foundation of creation is community. And I think in discipleship, I think a lot of believers think we don't need it because all we got is Jesus. But Jesus isn't enough.
What I think that Christians as a whole in America view discipleship as training. All it is education.
It's not a course.
No.
It's a lifestyle.
This, you know, I tell my pastors all the time that there's more ministry done in it. There's more ministry done in the relationship than there is ever in the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And this kingdom culture, this is something that's caught, not taught, and you can only catch it whenever you do life with one another.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Acts chapter 2, those verses in the 40s said they ate together, they learned together, They prayed and they worshiped together.
That's
To
right.
be apostolic is to embrace the fullness of discipleship.
That means we get to know one another intimately. That
And
means we that means we do life with one another. That it becomes our life. We've got this idea that church is a Sunday deal. It's a Sunday morning deal, or it's a Wednesday evening deal.
brother, we missing it.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Discipleship is you coming to my house and walking with me while I cut the grass.
Right,
Discipleship is you coming to my house and having a conversation with me while I'm prepping the dinner, while I'm cutting the meat, while I'm cutting the veggies, while I'm putting the seasoning on, while I'm
right,
laying down stuff, while I'm sticking it in the oven. We're talking
right. It Amy cracks me up, man.
after
Uh,
hours. Listen, that's a bar. Discipleship is after hours.
right. We've got it's a nice little thing that we talk about it all the time. It's Amy, we've got so many stories, man. It's not even funny.
Yeah, listen.
It's not even.
Listen, saints. You're not going to hell if you miss a Sunday.
That's right.
And some of the saints that miss a Sunday are better than the ones that ain't ever missed one.
But let me tell you, you miss a Sunday around here, we're going to end up at your house.
Hey,
We're going to end up at your house and find out why you missed.
come on.
But we've got this thing now. We call it it's Veritas After Hours,
I
which
like
is
it.
where
That's my
after
language.
all when those who just attend church, whenever they head out after the service, we eat together a lot around here, and it's known as Veritas After Hours, because the conversations that get had are not only intense, but most of the time, we can't have those when the good people are around. We can't have them because they're inappropriate.
Oh, the Pharisees and the Sadducees can't
Yeah,
handle it.
I'm gonna say good people. When the holy people are around, we can't have those
The
conversations.
legalists,
Right. Well, the holy people, when the holy people around.
the righteous
So
ones.
you both know, we both know what I'm talking about.
Oh,
But
okay. My bad. Like,
it's all good. JJ, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, brother.
this has been amazing.
I really have enjoyed this, and hopefully I can get you on again in the future. We can dive in. I'd like to eventually one day maybe get a panel together, a couple of white pastors and some black pastors and some Hispanic pastors, and say, hey, what do we need to do to reach across this aisle and see what we can do. So
That'd
that
be
is
dope.
definitely something that I'd like to throw together
Well,
and
I
see
just
what
had
we
an
can do.
idea too. I'll tell you later.
All right. Well, for those of y'all that were watching, those of y'all that have hung out with us for 2 hours, I love you. Y'all are fantastic. Y'all are great, awesome people. Thank you for sharing. We'll do the drawing for the other T-shirt next Monday night. And I'm going to throw this out there real quick. If you are a coffee drinker, do me a favor and go to padillacoffee.com. padillacoffee.com, and this is coffee that Pastor Padilla and his wife have put together. It's one of the ways that they're supporting their ministry. This is not a paid advertisement. Let me say that right now. Not a paid advertisement, but it's just me wanting to try and help out a brother. So go to padillacoffee.com, order your coffee, and shoot them a message on Facebook. Just tell them that you love them and that you appreciate it. JJ, thank you, brother. Thank you so very much. Thank you for being real. Thank you for being willing to share your heart with us and have sit down and have a conversation. So we greatly appreciate it. Everybody else, I love you guys. Y'all have a good night, and I will see y'all next Monday with Prophet Ray Shipman. So see ya.